The town had 3 streets, and she had walked all of them by noon. Not because she was looking for anything. She had stopped looking for things a while back, somewhere between the crossing at Red Deer and the 2 nights she spent in a grain shed outside of Lacombe, because the next coach wasn't until Thursday. She walked because standing still made her think, and thinking in a new place before she knew what was worth thinking about seemed like a waste of what little she had left. The hardware store was on the corner of the main road and a dirt path that didn't have a name yet. She knew it didn't have a name because there was no sign. And in her experience, towns that hadn't gotten around to naming their side streets were towns that were still deciding whether they were going to become something or not. She didn't hold that against them. She was still deciding the same thing about herself. A man came out of the hardware store carrying a length of pine trim across one shoulder and a paper bag of nails in his free hand. He did not look at her. He looked at the trim, adjusting it slightly, and then walked south without checking the road first. She noticed that. Not the confidence of it. The economy. He was solving a problem while he walked. He didn't have leftover attention for strangers. She kept moving. The boarding house was run by a woman named Mrs. Corbett, who had strong opinions about mealtimes and weak opinions about everything else. She showed the room without flourish. Bed, window, hook on the door, basin on the stand. She said the rate and waited. She paid for 2 weeks. It was more than she'd planned. She did it anyway because the window faced east, and she had learned, over the past year, that morning light was not something to bargain away. "You looking for work?" Mrs. Corbett asked. "Yes, dressmaking, cooking, whatever's needed." Mrs. Corbett looked at her hands. Most people did. They were not the hands of a woman who had spent her life doing light things. There was a scar along the left thumb from a hinge she'd repaired at her father's house the winter before he died. There was a callus on the right palm that had been there so long she didn't remember not having it. "Halverson at the mill might need someone for the books," Mrs. Corbett said. "And there's a man on the East Road who's been building. He put a notice up at the post office last week. Something about needing a second pair of hands." She said she'd look into both. She looked into the second one first. The East Road was exactly that. A road going east, packed gravel where it left town and bare dirt within 100 yards. The farms on either side were autumn quiet. The fields had been cut and left, the stubble pale and stiff in the morning cold. She had not been in this part of the country before, and she noticed the sky differently here, wider somehow, or maybe just less interrupted. Back home, the hills broke the horizon into pieces. Here you could see a long way before anything stopped you. She smelled the sawdust before she saw the frame. It was a house going up on a rise set back from the road, the foundation already poured, the floor joists in, the wall frame standing on 3 sides. The 4th side was being raised as she came up the path. She could see it going vertical, slow and controlled, a man with his shoulder against the frame and a rope run through a block above, walking it upright by himself. She stopped at the edge of the cleared ground and watched him tie it off. He was not young, not old either, somewhere in the difficult middle, where a man has usually either figured himself out or given up on figuring. He wore no jacket despite the cold, and when he came around the frame to check the plumb on the far corner, he was moving the way her father had moved on job sites. Not rushed, not performing, just working through a sequence that existed somewhere in his head and his hands both. He saw her when he straightened from the corner. "You're the one looking for help," she said. It wasn't a question, but she left space at the end of it. He looked at her the way the town hadn't, directly taking in what was there. "Put a notice up," he said. "I saw it." He came toward her slowly, the way a man does when he's thinking and walking at the same time. He stopped a few feet away and looked at her hands without making it obvious he was looking at them. She let him. "What do you know about framing?" he asked. "I can follow a plumb line. I can run a saw square. I helped put up a barn outside Olds when I was 17 and a shed behind my father's shop the year I was 22. I'm not going to pretend I'm a carpenter, but I'm not going to cost you more time than I save you." He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of a man deciding, the quiet of a man who had already mostly decided and was just finishing the thought. "Board and 30 cents a day," he said. "There's a bunkhouse at the back of the neighbor's property, ask Voss. He won't mind. I'll need to keep my room in town for the week," she said. "I have things there, Fine, I can start today. He nodded and walked back toward the frame. She followed. He did not explain things twice. She understood this about him within the first hour. He showed her once how he wanted the blocking set between the joists, how far up to nail, which face to keep proud. Then he moved on. If she had a question, she asked it once and concisely, and he answered the same way. By the end of the first afternoon, she had stopped having many questions. The work itself was teaching her. What she noticed, in the way she had always noticed things, he did not waste motion. Every movement had a destination. When he picked up a board, he already knew which end was going where. When he set down a tool, he set it where he could reach it again without looking. She had known men who worked this way and men who didn't, and it was not something you could fake for long. It came from 1,000 days of doing a thing until the thinking dropped away and only the doing was left. She worked hard and she didn't mention it. Men who worked hard and mentioned it were working half as hard as they thought. She'd believed that since she was young and nothing had changed her mind. By noon, he had put a kettle on a small stove he'd rigged inside the completed section of the frame. He poured 2 cups and set one on a sawhorse near her without asking whether she wanted it. She picked it up. The coffee was strong. They stood on opposite sides of the incomplete wall and drank it without talking. Outside, the wind had come up along the field. The stubble was moving in it, a dry sound, like paper. She looked at the framing she'd helped set that morning. It was square. She knew it was square without checking because she had checked while doing it, the way her father had taught her. Build it right going in and you won't have to fix it coming out. Your father build? He asked. She looked at him. He was watching the same framing she'd been watching. Yes, she said. Thought so. He finished his coffee. She finished hers. They went back to work. At the end of the first week, Voss came by to see the progress. He was a thick-set man in his 60s with a gray beard he hadn't attended to in some time, and a way of walking that suggested one of his hips had opinions. He looked at the walls that were up and the roof plate going on and made a sound in his throat that was not quite approval, but was not disapproval either. You're moving, he said to the man. Moving well, the man said. Voss looked at her. You Gertrude's niece? No, she said. Thought you looked like Gertrude's niece. He didn't pursue it. He looked at the corner she'd been working on that morning, the one where the rim joist met the sill plate, and he leaned in to look at the fit. That's clean, he said, more to himself than to her. She's good, the man said. It was the first time he had said anything of the kind. She did not react to it, but she held it, the way you hold a thing that's warmer than you expected. Voss went back to his property, and they went back to work. By the second week, she had moved out of Mrs. Corbett's and into the bunkhouse, which was actually a converted granary that Voss had put a wood stove and 2 rope beds into at some point for reasons that had never quite been explained. It was cold in the mornings, and she had learned to get the fire going before she was fully awake, doing it by feel, the way you learn things you have to do every day. She was up before the man most mornings. She liked it that way. She liked having the walk out to the site, to herself, in the blue-gray of early light, the frost on the grass not yet giving under her boots. She liked the moment when the frame of the house came into view through the trees and she could take inventory. What was done, what was next, what the day was for. Her father had taught her that. Stand and look before you touch anything. Know what you're walking into. Her father had taught her a lot of things and then left her without warning, the way good teachers sometimes did, too soon, before she had finished learning everything she needed. She had not talked about him to anyone in a long time. She was not sure why. One evening, after they had put away the tools, and he was banking the stove in the partially completed room that was going to be a kitchen, she started. My father died 2 years ago April, she said. He was a joiner, did finish work mostly. Cabinets and door casings and built-ins. He could make a corner disappear. The man didn't say anything, but he didn't move away from the stove either. He was sick for about 8 months before, long enough to teach me what he could, not long enough to teach me everything. She looked at her hands. I spent the year after trying to figure out which was which. The stove ticked. Outside the wind had gone down and the night was very still. My wife, he said, and then stopped. She waited. She was a piano teacher, he said. She gave lessons in the front room. This house is going where that house was. He said it without weight, or with weight so long carried it, had become indistinguishable from the rest of him. Not to put it back, to put something forward. She understood that. She understood it the way you understand something that you already knew but had not yet found the words for. They let the silence sit between them the way people do when they have said enough for one night. She went back to the bunkhouse and lay on the rope bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about what it meant to build something forward. She had spent 2 years going sideways, she thought. Not forward or backward, just across, looking for ground that held. Maybe that was necessary. She didn't know. She knew that the ground here seemed to hold. She fell asleep earlier than usual. She slept well. The child arrived on a Thursday. His name was Win. He was 7 years old, and he came in on the coach from Innisfail with a tag tied to his coat that had a name and address on it in a woman's handwriting that was not his mother's. He stood outside the post office with his bag at his feet and looked at the street with large, calm eyes. The eyes of a child who has learned that new places are something you observe before you react to. She was at the post office herself, picking up a package of drill bits she'd sent for when the coach came in. She watched from the doorway as the postmaster, a nervous, thin man named Edgerton, whose wife had apparently done everything in the office that required steadiness, came out to check the tag, and then looked up and down the street with the expression of a man who had been told to expect something and was now not sure what to do with it. The man came out of nowhere and everything. He was across the street with a load of shingles in the wagon, and he was beside the boy and crouching to look at him before she'd quite processed that he'd moved. He and the boy spoke. The boy spoke back. The man stood and put his hand briefly on the boy's head. Not ruffling it, not patting it, just resting it there for a moment. And then he picked up the bag and they walked to the wagon together. She stepped back into the post office and collected her package. She did not ask about the child until the next morning, and then only because he appeared at the building site at 8 o'clock with a tin cup of coffee he had apparently made himself and handed it to her with the seriousness of a person performing a task they'd been given. "Thank you," she said. "He said you take it without anything," the boy said. He had a slight French lilt to his words, the kind you heard in certain parts of Alberta where the old families had settled. It was a pleasing sound, old and careful. "He's right," she said. The boy looked at the wall she'd been nailing. "That's the bedroom side," he said. "How do you know?" He showed me the plans. He turned and looked at the rest of the frame with those calm, observing eyes. He said the window on that side catches the evening. She looked at the wall, too. She had not known what room it was for. She had been building it as a wall, which was what she knew. That it would become a place where someone would watch the evening was not something she had thought about. "Where did you come from?" she asked, not intrusively, the way she asked everything, direct and quiet, leaving room. "Montreal," he said. "My mother was his wife's sister." He said it simply, the way children explained complicated things when the complication had become familiar. "She died in September." She nodded. There was nothing to add to that. She knew about September deaths. She knew about the particular way grief arrived in the fall, when everything was already going dormant, when the cold came and the light thinned and the world seemed to be practicing for something worse. "Can I stay and watch?" he asked. "You can help," she said. "If you want, there are things you can do." He stayed all morning and he was useful. He held boards. He fetched nails from the coffee tin she used as a supply box. He swept sawdust without being asked. He did not get underfoot. He was the kind of child who watched a thing carefully before he involved himself in it. And she recognized that because she had been that kind of child too. The man did not explain the boy. She did not ask him to. What she noticed was this, that Win moved around the man the way children move around people they are still measuring, not close, not far, circling slowly, testing the distance. And the man allowed it. He did not pull the boy toward him or push him away. He gave him tasks and checked the work and corrected it once, quietly, without fuss, and then moved on. She had seen men handle children they didn't know how to love with noise and performance. A lot of roughhousing and loud praise that meant nothing. This was not that. This was something quieter and harder and more honest. She found herself watching them the way she watched the framing, taking inventory, noting what was straight and what was not yet, what needed time. The roof went on in the third week, and that changed everything. When the roof goes on, a building becomes a house. This is a fact that she had not known abstractly, but understood the moment it happened. Standing inside the frame with the boards overhead and the sound of the wind going around rather than through, she stopped in the middle of carrying a load of trim and simply stood there for a moment, listening to what a house sounded like. The man was up on the ridge, nailing off the peak cap. Wynne was below, watching him. "Is it done?" the boy asked. "Not close," she said, "but it's something now." Wynne looked up at the man on the roof. "He does this himself every time?" "First time I've seen it," she said. "But I think so." Why? She thought about that, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to give him the right one. "Some people build things because they need shelter," she said. "Some people build things because the building is what they know how to do when they don't know what else to do. Both are real reasons." Wynne was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think he's both." She looked at the boy. He was 7 years old, and he had been in Montreal, and his mother had died in September, and he was standing in a field in central Alberta, watching a man he didn't yet know build a house he didn't yet understand. And he had just said something more accurate than most adults managed. "I think you're right," she said. There was a day in late October when the cold came hard and early, and she got up in the dark, and the stove in the bunkhouse would not catch. She worked at it for 15 minutes in the dark and the cold, and nothing. The wood was dry, the flue was clear. Something was wrong with the draft. She had rebuilt a stove before, and she knew she could fix it, but not in the dark and not before the workday started. She put on every layer she owned and walked to the building site because she had nowhere else to be warm. He was already there. She didn't ask how long he'd been there. She came in and stood near the brazier he'd set up in the main room for exactly these mornings. It was the kind of forethought she had come to expect from him and had stopped remarking on, and she held her hands out to it. He didn't ask why she was cold. He looked at her for a moment and said, "I'll look at the bunkhouse stove this evening." "It's the draft," she said. "I know. I'll look at it." She nodded. He poured her coffee and she took it, and they stood on opposite sides of the brazier and watched the fire inside it the way people watch fires in the early cold morning. Not for information, just for comfort. "My mother used to," she said, and then stopped. He waited. "She used to say that the first cold snap was the house telling you who lived there, who stayed." She hadn't thought of that in years. She hadn't thought of her mother in years without effort. And now the memory had arrived by itself, unbidden, like something that had been waiting for the right temperature. I don't know what she meant by that exactly. I think I was too young when she said it. "I think I know what she meant," he said. She looked at him. "A house built right and a house lived in right both keep heat the same way," he said. "Not by trapping it, by deciding what they're for." She thought about that for a long time afterward. She fixed a door the following week that had been hanging wrong since the frame went up. It was a small thing, a millimeter of sag in the hinge side, enough to make the door drag on the jamb, not enough for most people to bother with. She shimmed the hinge, reset the screws, and hung it again. She swung it 3 times. It moved perfectly. It moved the way a good door should move, like it wasn't moving at all, like it was just opening and closing in the place it was always supposed to be. She didn't say anything about it. She moved on to the window casing on the east side. An hour later, she heard the door swing from across the room. Then she heard it swing again. Then a third time she looked over. The man was standing in the doorway, swinging the door back and forth with one hand, paying attention to it the way she had paid attention to it when she first tested it. He looked up and found her eyes. He didn't say anything either, but something was said. Wynne asked her one morning, in the way children asked things, without preface, as if the question had been there all along and he was only now giving it sound. "Are you going to stay?" She was fitting a window sash. She kept her eyes on the work. "I don't know yet," she said. "He doesn't ask people to stay," the boy said. "Usually." She looked at him then. He was sitting on an upturned crate, eating an apple he'd brought from somewhere, watching her with those serious taking-in eyes. "What does he usually do?" she said. "He asks them to start," Wynne said. "And then he waits." She turned back to the window sash. The fit was close but not right. She took the plane to the edge, a single pass, and checked again. "That's what patience looks like," Wynne said. as if he were making a note to himself. You do the next thing right, and you wait. She planed the edge once more. The fit was clean. She set the sash in the frame, and it settled the way things settle when they belong, without protest, without gap, exactly into the space left for it. November came, and the house was close. The trim was going on. The floors were in. The kitchen was fitted. Wynne had taken over the sweeping operation entirely and performed it with the thoroughness of a person who understood that the end of a thing deserved the same care as the beginning. She was fitting the last window casing. The one in the room, the man had said, caught the evening when he came and stood in the doorway. She kept working. Corbett mentioned there's a woodlot property south of here, he said, going up for lease in the spring. New owner doesn't know what to do with it. Needs someone to assess what's harvestable and what needs to be left. She set the casing and pressed it in and checked the reveal. Even. She reached for a nail. I know timber, she said. Some I know, he said. She drove the nail, checked the face, reached for the next one. There'd be work in it, he said, the assessment. And after, if the less needs management, someone who knows what they're looking at. She set the next nail. Spring, she said. Spring, he said. She drove the nail. She checked the casing from both ends. It was right. She looked at him in the doorway. He was leaning against the frame she had helped build. The frame she knew was plumb because she had made sure of it. And the evening light was coming through the window behind her, and it was falling across the floor of a room that had not existed 2 months ago. And Wynne was sweeping somewhere down the hall. She could hear the soft rhythm of it. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded. That's all I asked. He hadn't asked anything. That was what she thought as she turned back to the last piece of casing, the one that would finish the room and make it what it was going to be. He had offered. He had waited. He had done the next thing and left space for her to do the same. She picked up the plane and ran it once along the edge, a single clean pass, the shaving curling away like something the wood had been holding and could finally let go. She set the casing and it fit.